Alex, want to talk to
Here
you
we go.
quickly about LilJordan Humphrey because I forget your recent 53-man roster projection, your 2.0. You didn't
Yeah.
have him on, correct? He was
So,
off,
okay.
just off.
So I didn't
And
as I
obviously,
was
things have
writing
changed.
it.
I don't want to. I'm not
Well, no,
setting
no,
you up
no, no, no.
here.
It's
I'm
a
not.
funny story. No, it's a
Yeah.
funny story. I was writing this whole thing and I thought it was really good. I was getting in depth about, oh, he's on the bubble and this and that. And here's why I'm leaving him off, but he could do this. And then I'm like, literally, as I finish it up, because I was writing it Saturday, I know it dropped today. I wrote it ahead of time. As I'm finishing it up, I get a text with the tweet that, Taekwon's hurt. I went back in and changed it. I put LilJordan Humphrey on because when I was going to talk about it, one of the lines was, well, if Tyquan Thornton's injury is serious and he's going to miss time. So I have him on. I have him as one of my last guys on. I think like he's a guy, he makes sense. If Thornton's out, he
Oh
makes
yeah.
sense as a guy to keep. The thing is, I think at this point, when you look at the players like this, right? The guys on the bubble, remember, like we talked about before, for a player to be placed on IR and be eligible to return, they have to first make the 53. So what you have is teams will put those guys on the roster, IR them, maybe cut another player, put that player through waivers and try to get them back. Patriots did that last year with Miles Bryant. They cut Miles Bryant. They put, I don't remember who it was on IR, maybe Steph Gilmore, I think. And then they signed Miles Bryant after because he cleared waivers. Now waivers,
LilJordan
any
Humphrey,
team
he
can
ain't
claim
getting
him.
through. He's not getting through
So
waivers.
that's the thing. I think he's done enough at this point. Somebody's going to claim. There's no way 31 teams are going to pass on just adding LilJordan Humphrey for free. So this becomes the question, right? Do they want to give him that roster spot off the bat? Has he done enough where they'll give him that roster spot and sacrifice somebody else? Maybe it's a guy like Sean Wade. Maybe it's a guy like JJ Taylor, Justin Herron, like any of these bubble guys. Do they risk putting that guy through waivers and keep Humphrey? Or do they maybe say, you know what, we just don't have the spot for LilJordan right now, and they try to maybe give that spot to a guy like Trey Nixon or Christian Wilkerson, if Wilkerson's healthy, who maybe has a better shot at getting through waivers? That becomes the question. I think Humphrey's done enough that they'll give him that spot. But that's basically what it comes down to right now.
And for me, and I floated this out to you, I think 2 weeks ago in person, we were down there, and you hear this all the time, right? Like, oh, just like what they said with N'Keal Harry, just make him a tight end. Like it doesn't work that way, right? But I think where you can get interesting with trying to fit him on the roster, like he's a good player in the middle of the field. I think his skills could translate to that position as a number 3 tight end. And let's put it this way. If he's playing tight end for you, you're in a tough situation because that means either Jonnu or Hunter Henry are probably hurt for a long time.
Right.
Where I think he could get on the team is, they'll carry that extra wide receiver maybe than what we're used to. And a guy like Devin Asiasi, who I think is a bubble player, you carry that guy as a third tight end as like a depth piece. If things really go bad, they're going to play for you. I think LilJordan Humphrey can fill that role that Devin Asiasi would play and give you a lot more in terms of in the kicking game. And you can play him all over. Like it's not crazy to think. And he fielded questions this today about, he's open to moving to tight end. And like I said, they might not necessarily announce him as that, but when they come up with their initial 53, they might only carry 2 tight ends, but like LilJordan Humphrey's really viewed that way. Like that's a way to kind of work around it too, where you can get everybody through.
Yeah, I mean, you see it with the big slot guys, right? They'll line up in line, they'll block. It's not totally unheard of. It's interesting you bring up the N'Keal thing. This isn't moving him to tight end. That's not what the conversation is. The conversation is he's big enough and he's technically sound enough blocker that he can do some things that a tight end is going to do for you.
If push comes to shove and you really need it,
Right. Or like just if you want to, I mean, it can give you a different package. Maybe you're an 11, right? Or you could even come out in 10. You look smaller, and then he lines up in line. So you look smaller. The defense maybe goes with a nickel or a dime or something, and then Humphrey's going to be able to block against a nickelback. So that's you can kind of do weird stuff like that with it. The special teams is the big thing, Ryan, that you hit on there.
Oh yeah,
he made the team when he downed that punt.
Yeah,
that's where he went from bubble.
Just like Brendan Schooler too. He had a really good day. Like he's probably
so I had Schooler as my 54th player. I just couldn't fit him. I had him. It's
a guy that could probably get through waivers though and bring back
exactly.
Like
and this is
Cody Davis is probably on the back nine of his career. I think that's kind of the role they're trying to have him eventually. What does he even play? Is he a safety? Is he listed as a safety? But he's
listed as safety. Most of these guys are listed as safeties. Bill even calls Slater a safety. But yeah, with Schooler, and I think, you brought up Devin Asiasi in this conversation too, and we just talked about, can guys get through waivers? Well, the practice squad elevation rules make this really interesting, right? Devin Asiasi is not going to play if he's on the 53-man roster. He didn't last year. He's inactive for every game. Like you just talked about, LJ Humphrey plays teams. Devin Asiasi doesn't do that. So are you going to give him a roster spot to be inactive where they can probably get him on the practice squad? And then if they really need a tight end, they can elevate him, right? You can elevate players up to each player up to 3 times a year. You throw Matt Sokol in there too. That's probably another guy they can get to the practice squad. You make those two guys your practice squad guys. That's 6 games you have of a third tight end. If you need any more than that, where you need like a real true tight end, like you said, one of those guys, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, is probably on IR. You could just outright sign one of the two you stash on the practice squad. So,
and at that point, like your season at that position, like you're just looking for something in terms of production,
right?
Like if you're at that point.
And by the way, with the tight end thing, don't sleep on Jalen Wademeyer either. Like he's not going to make the team, but he's an interesting name to have around. But yeah, like they don't need to keep a third tight end. It's the same thing where you go back, they rarely, if ever, keep any fewer than 8 offensive linemen. But you could sort of justify them keeping 7 this year because if you get Arlington Hambright to the practice squad, which you probably can, Cody Rusty to the practice squad, which you probably can, Yasir Durant, and look, you can't keep all of these guys, right? You only have a certain number of practice squad spots, but you get the point, right? If you have like 2 or 3 offensive linemen on the practice squad, or you could even have 4. I think they've had that many. Again, 4 times 3, 12. That's 12 games. You have that eighth offensive lineman. You can elevate. You can sign and release guys and churn through that. So they can be a little thinner at positions they maybe traditionally wouldn't be because of that practice squad elevation thing. And it's going to allow them to keep a guy like LJ Humphrey. Like, if Shaun Wade makes the roster, that's probably how he makes it. Joshua Bledsoe, Brennan Schooler, like that's how these guys are going to make the roster. Because, and this is, I talk about this. Evan used to get so sick of me talking about this, Ryan. So we'll see how you like it. And I wrote about this today on 985thesportshub.com. When I look at roster construction, right, you can kind of look, and Bill talked about this actually on Saturday. And I'd never heard him talk about this before. So it was cool because I talked about it last year. You can almost look at it like you look at March Madness, right? You have a 53-man roster, but is it the 53 best players on your 90-man? Not necessarily, right? Because is your backup quarterback one of your 53 best players? Probably not, but he's going to make the team. So now one of your top 53, that guy's out. And if you go, so
I love that analogy.
You love it?
Sense.
So I did this last year. I went through, and again, the practice squad elevations kind of screw with the numbers a little bit, but okay, historically, what's over the last 10 years, what's the minimum at each position every team keeps? 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 4 receivers, 2 tight ends, 7 offensive linemen. So it's not necessarily 53 spots can be won by the best 53 players. It's, okay, some of these spots have to go to an offensive lineman. Some of them have to go to a corner. So how many at-large spots, right? Like March Madness, right? At-large bids. How many at-large spots really are there? For, just flat out, there's probably about 13. But then you have guys, right? So 4 is the positional minimum at wide receiver. Well, the Patriots have 5 wide receivers who are locks. So that you lose an at-large spot. They have 3 quarterbacks that are locks. You lose an at-large spot. How many spots are really up to be won on the Patriots roster by the best player? It's like 5 or 6. And there's, I wrote about this on 985thesportshub.com. There's about 13 players that have a real shot at one of those 5 or 6 spots. And that's where you get into LilJordan Humphrey, Devin Asiasi, Brennan Schooler. Like that's what we're talking about here. And what this ultimately is, to wrap up the rant, we talk about the term roster bubble all the time, right? As kind of this abstract thing. That's what the roster bubble is. It's those at-large spots and the players fighting for it.